Sally Forth. Okay. Uh, so I'd like now to build on our experience this morning with a glimpse of an ABM, and I'd like to use that to build on our understanding of more background principles of ABM. Again, at a fairly basic, high-level way, but in a way that starts getting into some of the specifics about like how ABMs function within the particular platform that we're employing within this boot camp, namely AnyLogic. But you'll find virtually most of these things carry over to others. I'll flag things that are rather specific, but we will build understanding of the AnyLogic platform here. Okay, so to that end, I posted to your lecture slides folder of your participant resources a set of slides, PDF of a set of slides called Overview of ABM Modeling. And I would invite you not only to system science, but to follow that with me. Okay, so I'm going to that end, switch to screen sharing. But we're going to be doing so going back and forth with the model that we built from this morning. So if you've shut down AnyLogic, please bring it up again, and it should reopen that model and have it right there for you. So you could explore it as will be my want in the coming lecture here. So we're going to go back and forth between a model and understanding that model, this here model, and the slides. Okay. And here we go. Okay. So agent-based modeling, in a word, seeks to understand the behavior of complex systems through the lens of agent-agent and agent-environment interactions. You heard it a few minutes ago in talking about ABM, IBM, right? Many people, you'll hear a common refrain: ABMs are a bottom-up modeling tradition. I have real qualms about that, because the world has no bottom, and it kind of glosses over an important practical issue or important practical observation, which is like where we pick the bottom of our layer of abstraction is actually rather important sometimes. We have some models that it's a person, for example, it might be the lowest level person agent, but others which go into aspects of dynamics associated with their physiology. Well, indeed, this is a ripe area for a hybrid model. Aspects of their immune response to infection and viral load, etc. And so I don't feel quite comfortable talking about bottom up. I think it's more upwards facing. It moves upwards from whatever the bottom is in the model upwards. I'll say that, but it's not like agent level is the bottom that is common to all. There's different depths. Okay, but in a sense, we specify behavior involving some situated agent and their interaction. We study how that induces overall behavior in the system. We saw that this morning, right? We depicted things at an individual level. There were nominally a set of other kind of supporting agents, like homes and schools and workplaces. And then by running it, maybe, running it with reduced community visitation as a posited change, we induce some behavior. This is high-level behavior induced by myriad agents interacting, infecting each other, moving around these environments, etc. And we're just kind of doing some bookkeeping and keeping track of how many were infected over time and when they were infected, etc. Right? So this is what I mean by it induces overall behavior. And when I say overall, please recognize like sometimes we have a mesoscale or multiple mesoscales, at the level of a family, at the level not just a person, but family, neighborhood, or school, or city, etc. And if there's interest, we can together build hierarchical models of that sort, which are similar in spirit to kind of multiple levels of multi-level modeling that you might see in statistics, but where that deals with associations and not dynamic effect, it's a static model. This would be a dynamic. So ABMs vary, and this is a really important point. ABMs vary along many dimensions, and you'll see some of them discussed in this bootcamp. And I want to emphasize this. Not all ABMs are empirically rich. Some are extremely stylized. And I spoke earlier about like how there's a real difference between traditional ABMs where there's endogenous behavior. Agents are kind of giving rise to their behavior by evolving in terms of their latent state on the one hand, versus microsimulation, where you have these agents who are really their transitions tend to be very statistically based on empirical patterns from pension records and administrative data. So ABMs vary dramatically in terms of their level of description, et cetera, and the level of stylization. I like to encourage students when they think about the scope of an ABM to use what I call the O-Parties framework. This is related to Ross Hammond's Partey framework, but I parse it out a little bit more. So when you think about the scope of your ABM for the next little bit of a change and iterating, it's useful to think about, what populations are there, what outputs are there, what assumptions are there that you introduce. We'll introduce later a distinction between endogenous factors, exogenous factors, and ignored factors, factors that are left out of the model, often consciously. They're in the parking lot for now. Maybe come back to them later, incorporate them later, but for now they're excluded, consciously so. Exogenous things that are told to the model, assume this, and that's what parameters encode. They're pre-specified assumptions. They're pre-specified. They're not generated by the model. And endogenous things where the model generates them by its behavior. So this model we saw here, when we ran it, we saw a number of infections over time. That's endogenous. It generates it. How many times, where infections occur in the population? That's endogenous. How many times a given person has been infected here, 0 or 1? That's endogenous. It's generated by the model. Parameters, we tell the model what to assume. We tell the assumption we want to impose. Endogenous things, the model tells us. That's the characteristic of these models. They produce emergent behavior. They produce these things. We don't tell it how many infections will occur over time. It tells us, based on your assumptions, this is what you'd expect to see. Okay, so outputs, populations, parameters, actions, things that cause changes in state, and rules that govern actions. We'll talk about those quite a bit. What are the characteristics of time? Is it continuous or discrete? Agent-based models can be found on either side of that continuum. In AnyLogic, they're most commonly continuous, but you can dictate it be discrete if you want. Interventions. What interventions are you thinking about? Things that alter the model or pose what-if questions of any sort. What's the nature of the environment? Are you imposing networks? Is it geographic? Is it some sort of abstract spatial environment, like we saw for this morning's model? Is it some sort of discretized space, like you're in this pen of the feedlot or that pen of the feedlot or that pen, you're in like a particular location, but you're not in a continuous space. It's like you're in some location. It shapes your context, who your neighbors are, what have you, who your interactions are with, but it's not continuous. And then finally, what aspects of state? This last one is last, but arguably first in terms of importance. State, evolving state. That's what distinguishes perhaps most prominently dynamic models. The fact that, well, that's a central feature of how they evolve is their state. Okay, so what's an agent-based model here? Well, look, you have one or more populations composed of individual agents, each associated with certain characteristics. So here we have nominally, I guess it would be 5 populations. In fact, if you go to main, you go down main, and you could see the populations laid out there. And in fact, if you look over here, you'll see each of these is a population of agent, population of schools, population of workplaces, etc. The population, most of these, though, as we noted, are pretty passive. I mean, look at the school, just sits there like a bump on a log. The workplace, similarly, the community place. These are places where agents got to interact. That here they're sort of serving as containers. They sort of are these receptacles that people go to, these vessels in which people interact, but they don't have agency fully here, and so I view them as kind of barely agents. They have utility to represent them as agents in terms of implementation, but morally, I don't think of them so much as agents. But we can treat them as such. That's fine. They're just a particularly simplistic agent. Where agenthood is really embraced here is at the level of the person. And persons have each of these populations is associated with parameters. That's here. What's their age in years? What's their associated school or workplace? Where's their home? These are all parameters. That's what these things encode. It's an assumption about them. They have a certain age, for example. They have a certain school or home. They have a home for sure, and they have the school or workplace. Okay. They have state. Where's their state? Well, it's collectively for this concern, namely infection, it's collectively captured. Possible states are captured here. For this concern, their location is captured here. And per Roselle's question earlier, there's a mathematics associated with this. There's a well-defined mathematics associated with transitions among these things that quite precise in these 2-state charts. You can describe their relationship in a certain way in terms of the overall state of the person. So we have state, and it can be, in general, for an agent-based model, discrete or continuous. This is quite notable compared to an aggregate model, because in aggregate models, we might stratify the model, say, by age categories, age groups, but we don't have the option of making like age continuous or income continuous. Person's viral load continuous. Person's immune activation continuous, or what have you. I'm kind of glossing over that some of those. Yeah, I mean, they often are aspects of state. Occasionally, some might be treated as parameters. But anyway, we can represent it discrete or continuous. Same thing with parameter values. Like we could lend someone a continuous parameter value in ways that are just not possible. General with sort of aggregate models that one might use in a stock and flow context or a compartmental modeling context. Actions are the things that change the state here, and rules govern those. So that there's a rule here that governs when the state transition fires, and it's based on theory of stochastic processes, all very well defined mathematically. This is a hazard rate of 0.1 per day. So on average, this person will transition at 1 divided by that, which would be 10 days. So it's just a fact. If you have a Poisson process where you're in this state and you have a certain chance per day of leaving at a rate R, your mean time that you stay in here, all other things being equal, will be 1 over R. So this is implying a mean time in this state of 10 days because the rate of leaving is 0.1. 1 divided by 0.1 is 10 days. So actions are the things that change here. And you'll notice they come with these different icons in AnyLogic. See these here icons, like the little message, the little, it looks like an exponential distribution, same thing here. This little almost clock, or this one. Each of these has a certain meaning. It's a type of rule that governs it. This rule is fired when they arrive at their destination because they are moving to their destination. They're set moving to their destination up here. They're moving to it, and when they arrive, they go down with this state. They kind of go into this while they're moving, and then they go down there. So these little icons, the fact that this has a clock and this has a little, I think it looks like an exponential distribution. This is a message, is a sort of little envelope. That's not an accident. This is a timeout transition. This is a rate transition. So this fires after a certain time that you dictate when you come in here, the state, its originating state. This goes off at a certain rate per day. And this is triggered by the arrival of a message. This is triggered by arrival at a location. So we'll talk about these in much more detail, but just be aware those are the rules that govern these actions, that govern these transitions between states. Actions are about transitioning between states, changing their state. Rules are the things that govern those actions. And then they have a means of interaction with other agents or with the environment. And often we talk about interaction, environment interaction is embracing also interacting with other agents. How did they do that in this model? Well, it's hinted at by the fact that when they set to move to the workplace and they arrive at work, we connect them to nearby people. We hitch them up to nearby people in a little network so that they're subject to infection by those others so they can transmit infection. When they leave work, they disconnect from them and they can go and visit the community and they can connect to, if they go to some store, some restaurant or whatever, they'll connect to people there and they'll disconnect when leaving it. And then when they get home, they'll connect to nearby people and then they'll leave afterwards. Okay. So there's means of interaction. That connection then means when one's infected and they'll sort of send what are called messages or say, hey, you're exposed. Hey, I've exposed you to COVID or what have you. And if a person receives it who's nearby, they will get infected and move here from this to this. So there are these kind of means of interaction. In this case, it's networks. There are other means of interactions. We could send neighbors to neighbors in space. But networks in AnyLogic are the most common ways for two agents to interact with each other. There's a time horizon. In this case, it's dictated by on AnyLogic in general, it's dictated by the scenario. So this runs for 8,760 days. And there's some characteristics. In this case, it's continuous time. Excuse me. And then it has some initial state, and um, we'll explore that later. But basically, right now, these agents start in this state, except for one who's kind of Deus Ex Machina is told to be infective. Here's another who starts at a certain. These ones start at home. Everyone starts right now at home. In main, you'll find that there's an initial infection event, which goes off at time 0, goes off at the very start of the model, and basically it sends a exposure message to some unlucky agent that says basically you're randomly infected, someone randomly selected from the population. So I know this is a bit confusing. I'm just trying to situate you like this model too has initial state. All these are shown within this model. Okay, all of these are manifested by this model. Now, ABMs compared to other forms of modeling, certainly stock and flow modeling in system dynamics or compartmental modeling, but also discrete event, have smaller vocabularies. Even discrete event has somewhat smaller vocabulary. Agent-based modeling is very flexible. It's so flexible, you have to be very, very careful with it in terms of performance, in terms of scope, etc. But here, these are sort of a set of things that are germane to these models that often bear some thinking for a sizable model. So I'd like to talk about stock and flow model being kind of hedgehog model. You might think that smaller number of building blocks, a smaller vocabulary would mean stock and flow models are much more limited in what you can do with them. And the truth is they do have more of a strict discipline and strict kind of limits on some of the things you can express. That is certainly true. I can tell you through much experience, and students can testify to that. But there's enormous power, enormous insights that can come through proper combination of a few elements. Properly arranged, properly thoughtfully arranged stock and flow models can deliver incredible insights with a parsimonious attention to what's included. And here there's a great deal of insight that can come diagrammatically from saying like from reasoning about the diagram in light of empirical evidence. So things like, is this stock rising? Well, it means the sum of the inflows is greater than the sum of the outflows. Very, very powerful. Agent-based modeling, I like to characterize as fox knowledge. This is based on as I understand, Russian proverb contrasting the knowledge of the hedgehog versus the knowledge of the fox. The hedgehog knows one thing really, really well and uses that thing. The fox has lots and lots of knowledge and employs different things at different times. It has a bigger repertoire. So here we have a large modeling vocabulary, different subsets of that vocabulary used for different models. And there's really a flexibility in how you combine these elements for a given model, and a flexibility analysis focus using these. And unfortunately, right now, we're going to change this, but the forms that we have out of which we build agent-based models don't immediately lend themselves to interpretation of data quite as immediately as a stock and flow model. There's some elements of that when you reason about like a state chart and reason about people arriving, people leaving, but it's a little bit requires a bit more thinking. Anyway, we've gone through this with our actual model here. I have slides which kind of show this in particular context. I do want to emphasize here that when and this is maybe at a point that some people may find it immediately comfort with, some people may need understanding. This is a theory of personhood, a theory of personness, what it means to be a person. we articulate a theory of personhood, and then we enact it for a given scenario with a population of many, many people, right? This is one theory of personhood, but there's many people in a given scenario for the model typically that are around, right? And in fact, if we go over here, I'm deliberately sort of going and running this model so you can explore the interface. But I will just note that if you go to this, this template over here to the right, come on, this one here, this little button, you will find that there's a way to actually explore the agents while the model runs or when it's paused, either. You can pick, I want to go explore the population, and this will show you each agent. So here, dear participants, is agent 1. The first person 0. Conceptually, it's agent 1. We in computer science tend to start with 0, to the chagrin of our mathematics colleagues. So this is person 0. Perhaps you could call them patient 0, although I jest here. They're not necessarily the person who starts infected. But here, they're in a certain state at a given time. So this person is at home and they're in a recovered state. They've been infected in the past. We could actually record information about when they were infected, etc. But they have a certain home. Their home is home 63. And they are associated with I guess a workplace. This one, workplace 8. They work at workplace 8. So each person in the population has characteristics, right? This person has certain values of these parameters. The theory of personhood just has a parameter here, but that's like a cookie cutter template, right? It's like now you've got many cookies you've made with that cutter. These are many individuals. Now we're looking at individuals. This is a cookie made with that cookie cutter template, right? The mold. This is like a mold out of which we've shaped a particular person. The person has these characteristics dictated by the theory of personhood, but they have particular values for age and years or school or workplace or home, right? Here's person 1. They're in a different situation. They're at work right now and they're recovered as well. Okay. Here's person 2, person 3. And if we were to, person 3, here's person 3. They're currently infected. Oh my goodness. They're at school. Okay. Better alert the public health authorities here. They're at school right now. And goodness, they have a recovery time of nearly 800 days left till they recover. Man. So here, every person in the population has certain characteristics as delineated by this theory of personhood. I hope that is carrying over, but I just want to emphasize this is like a mold. And when we run the model in a given scenario, there's going to be many people who are shaped by this mold or in the shape of this mold, right? Feel free to put forward questions if you'd like any, like to ask any. So individual people will have particular values for, their home, their school, their workplace, their age and years. So parameters, these things basically characterize assumptions. In this case, it's an assumption about this person. I'm actually describing here for AnyLogic because it's very, very deliberate about providing parameters that can encode assumptions. And that's really what they are. And this is a common characteristic across all modeling platforms to characterize assumptions. But parameters give you a place to do it. It's not just a variable. You just slop it into some variable. No. A parameter encodes assumptions. And most commonly, they're static assumptions. but they could, they could be something that changes as long as it's pre-specified. It's not generated by the model, but maybe it's, over time, the temperature in Saskatoon. Some of you perhaps are unaware of it, but Saskatoon is a city that, like many cities of our fair country, exhibits seasonal variability. And so the temperature in July it has some differences than the temperature in January or February. And here, that could be put in as a pre-specified thing, what temperature to assume at different times, maybe for a model associated with homelessness, for example, giving risk of injury or harm. And, that would still be an assumption to communicate. It's an exogenous assumption. Now, parameters do something else, though. They also communicate in AnyLogic. And I need to convey this point. And I'll just somewhat gesture at it now, but we'll come back to it when we build a model. So here, a person needs an age. They have to have an age assigned to them. And where is that assigned? Well, it's communicated. This parameter serves to encode it, but it also is a mechanism of communicating it from the point, if you have a parameter in something like person, where they're told what to assume for it, it's what creates them. Whatever creates this thing. In this case, it's whatever creates a person. And what creates a person is this population of people in the global environment. There we go. And this is the thing that dictates when they're going to get created, this thing will be used to draw a value for their age. And it'll give them an age. And this will give them a random home. And this will give them a random school. This will give them a random workplace. If we wanted to impose a custom distribution, we could call that here. So these are the things. So it's where this is created, person is created, and population. So it draws values from these. This tell it how to get the value for their home, how to get the value for their age. This is like a little formula, right? Like you might have in Excel or Google Sheets, right? How to get their workplace, to fill in the assumptions that have to be specified for them. So there we go. And then by the same token, if we have main and it has certain parameters like the contacts per day to assume in the model, that's specified by the scenario, because the thing that creates main is the scenario. So baseline will say, hey, model, hey, main, you're going to assume 2 contacts per day. And it says, yes, ma'am. And it does that. Whereas if we have, is there a reduced number of connections, alas, I didn't create that here. But you could have alternative ones that, have that or something like that. So parameters encode assumptions for a given an agent, a given person. Encodes like how many contacts, what's my age? And it provides a way of communicating that from the point where that agent is created. For person, it's created in the population. For main, it's created by the scenario. Okay. Right. Okay. So we've seen state. We have our state. We've seen that as two concerns characterized. In general, we can have more than 2 without a combinatorial explosion, without all deal with all combinations. Now, importantly, and it's a real contrast to aggregate modeling. In aggregate modeling, we use our go-to strategy for capturing heterogeneity is we conceptually put people in separate boxes, so in separate stocks. We'll come back to that, but the sort of somewhat more elegant way to do it, if you have a lot of divisions like age groups, say 17 age group, so 5-year age groups and 80 plus, you will do what's called subscripting by this. Now that doesn't capture continuous age, but it does provide us a way of characterizing some heterogeneity, some differences in age. Where it starts to become hugely awkward and problematic is when you start having more and more divisions. Like you want to keep track of their age, and you want to keep track of their income, and you want to keep track of their care-seeking behavior. You need to consider all possible combinations of this in general, and it becomes a bit of a nightmare as you start adding categories of heterogeneity. So, we've had some models which I think have had 6 or 7 dimensions of subscripting, and that way lies madness, to quote King Lear. You don't want to go that way, but it creeps up quite easily. So by parceling these out, different concerns are parceled out into different state charts. I want to be clear. At a given time, a person is in one state with respect to one and one state with respect to the other. I should have emphasized that point better when I ran the model earlier, but better late than never. And I like to tell my wife, better Nate than never, too. So here we go. Let's go over here and we'll go to population. So this person at any one time is in a certain state with respect to their location, a certain state with respect to their infection. So they have a certain value for each of those, a certain defined state here, a certain defined state there. This is important because it prevents the curse of dimensionality. We don't have to deal with all possible combinations of them, that they're at home and susceptible, at home and infective, at home and recovery. We don't have to go that direction, through which lies madness. Here we can parcel these out. It's not saying that they're totally independent. We'll see there's nice ways of having them interact in some ways parsimoniously, but we don't have to consider all possible combinations as we would with distinguishing them in an aggregate model. So often we are rather generous in capturing state charts of different sort. We parcel out a person's state with respect to different attributes, in no way applying that, these are somehow just pure descriptions of the person. They have a certain state here with respect to their use of a certain substance, in this case, opioid related, here with respect to their interactions with the healthcare system, here with respect to their situation in the correction system, here with respect to willingness or readiness to change, here with respect to chronic pain status, etc. Okay, so I noted the different types of transitions, and I'm just going to leave you, as far as elaborating that here, so you can reference this slide. I'm not going to, for reasons of time, I want to get us building a model and interacting with models. So I'm not going to go into this more here, but I emphasized before just, the different semantics, the different meaning associated with these transitions, the different type of rule if you have one of these types, like a timeout transition. It's a type of transition versus an arrival. You arrive at a destination versus if you recover at a certain rate, etc. And as you can see, we have a total of 6 such types. Well, or 5 if you glom these together. I like to distinguish those. Okay. So, right. I think I've hit on that enough. Okay. Maybe I'll go light on this. It'll be something we bring up later. I will say that as you saw me mention for the initial state, we can have what are called events, which go off at a certain time. They trigger something happening at a certain time. And here, there's a variety of types. It's very common to create one that fires once. That's what this is, occurs once. Alternatively, we could have it go periodically, cyclically, which case maybe once a week we report new infection statistics, or the number of people in the ICU, the number of people in the hospital wards not in ICU, and the number of people currently diagnosed, or what have you. Alternatively, we can set, for example, a rate transition which fires at a certain Poisson rate, a certain chance per unit time, etc. So these are ways of like triggering some behavior periodically. You'll see them in the coming days quite a bit. So this is called an event object, but it can really represent a schedule, kind of a series of events over time. In this case, it's a single event. First ones. Right. Okay, and I talked about messages, or talked about networks. People can be connected with networks, and generally, if you have people connected with networks, or you have people who are merely adjacent and you want them to interact, what we're going to use in the coming days will be messages. It'll be one sending the other a message saying, for example, if one's infective, they send a message to another saying, hey, you're exposed. It's like I'm coughing and you're nearby. I can send you a message either to someone connected to me in my network, that's what this is, or connected to me like nearby me in space. I could do that alternatively. So this is, remember we said like agents have ways of interacting with other agents or with the environment. This is a way for agents to interact with agents. And in fact, we can generalize it for the environment. So typically this interaction is somewhat local. I interact with a nearby person nearby in the network. I'm connected to them maybe directly, or they're connected directly or one hop away. Those could be different ways of handling locality. Another way would be connected nearby in space. Now, this is showing someone periodically at a certain contact rate while they're infective, they're sending these messages at a certain contact rate, but it's not like clockwork. It's at a certain hazard rate, a certain chance per unit time. It's a Poisson type process, so it's a chance per unit time. We could do it at a timeout with some additional mechanism and have it do periodic. In any case, this is the one sending it, the person infected. They tell others, hey, you're exposed. Send to a random person, in this case, who's connected with them a network. If that person happens to be susceptible, they can get infected. This is important. Like a transition is only going to be able to be fired. It's only eligible to be fired if you're in the state. This agent is in the state whence it comes, from which it emerges. So this transition will never fire unless they're here. This transition will never fire unless they're here. It's conditional, right? It's a transition to change from the state. It's conditional on being in that state to this one. Once they're here, this transition is not going to be firing again for that person right now because they can't get back to the state right now. Okay. Okay, I'm glossing over. We're going to be building up models with this, and we'll see it a lot more. So we have these networks. Sometimes the networks are shown. Sometimes they're not directly visible. Many of the times we'll show them in this boot camp. We'll extensively show them. In this particular model we've been looking at, I didn't bother showing them because really people are kind of on top of each other when they go to work. Kind of unpleasant if you think about it. Or on top of each other if they go home, or on top of each other if they go to school. So I haven't shown visually networks because they're really right on top of each other. Oops. Oh, okay. Okay, you folks were interested in spatial embedding. We'll be talking about it. Be aware this is a core common and widely used need for agent-based modeling. Spatial embedding is key for capturing many phenomena, including, say, transmission in a agricultural supply chain, and say in a feedlot, or in terms of in the context of individuals that work nearby each other, or in the context of people close to each other and at home or what have you. Here we kind of used what I would call a kind of a discrete space. It's an abstract space. People are at home or they're at work, and there are these certain workplaces, and they go back and forth, right? You remember that? Here we go. Oh, am I still running this thing? Okay. But here we have them going between places and space. So let's see. It's time. Okay, they're going to leave after a certain number of hours at home. Maybe it's 16 hours. Oh, there we go. Now they're moving around. They're moving to the workplaces here, and they're going to be moving to schools. There's a school, for example. Right there. Here's a workplace. So now they're at home. Conceptually, they're at a place, but it's kind of discrete. It's not a continuous space. By contrast, you can have ready continuous space, either more stylized, and you could say this is continuous space, and you wouldn't be mistaken. I mean, these things are located at certain locations. But then there's other cases where we make it very geographically specific, or where we depict people in an indoor space. So, yeah, I will just note, for example, homes are at a initial location here that is uniformly chosen, and people start at their homes, so they're in this location. Schools are located at locations that are drawn. So there's some spatial environment here that's stylized. We're not getting into, how many meters they are apart. It's more they're in certain places where they have contact. The exact location, how distant they are, is less material in this model. I'm not sure it matters, other than are they in the same place or not. Yeah. There may be something about go to the no. I think it's just we give them a random. We give the person a random home. We give them a random school. We're not even looking like what's the closest school. That would be very, very easily done. But right now the model is so simple, we don't do that. Okay, so we'll learn in coming days. There's basically 4 types of embedding. Continuous, kind of in this kind of this abstract space. GIS, they're in a geographic space. 3D, which we're not going to get into, but you can capture with pedestrian library. You might have buildings or what have you. And discrete cells. You break it up into little sort of cells in which they might be arranged. So this is a internal spatial embedding. Here it's it's an environment that's captured in a way that reflects spatial layout, but it's not geographic. This is a 3D spatial environment in some of our work during the COVID pandemic. Right. Okay, so I think you realized from the earlier lectures that as a type of dynamic modeling, the interest here is in emergent behavior. It's in unexpected behavior. All 3 types of dynamic modeling. Agent-based modeling, yes, but also system dynamics modeling, stock and flow, and discrete event modeling. Discrete event simulation, excuse me, all have wonderful opportunities for emergence. The whole can be greater than the sum of the parts in all of these, and there's surprise behavior. And there's no surprise. There's no, and this is certainly true about ABMs. What's notable about ABMs, say, compared to stock and flow modeling, is that we have certain types of emergence that are less well captured, I'll say, more coarsely captured, if at all, and commonly not at all captured within stock and flow modeling, for example. So we might have patterns over, not only over time, like we will stock and flow, compartmental, patterns over space, or patterns over networks. People who have certain areas of the network have gotten heavily infected while others remain uninfected. This is gray is recovered, green is susceptible. So we can have patterns that emerge in an agent-based model because we can have networks and we can have space. We can have patterns over those constructs. And these are often very interesting, very insightful. And if anyone wants to explore some of this, this is SAR agent-based with PLE, which I've provided for you in the example models. Extraordinarily simple model, very stylized, very simplistic, but it's a thinking tool. It's a tool for sharpening our thinking. It's not claiming to depict the infection situation in Boston or Buffalo or Saskatoon or Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal. It's instead depicting a very stylized space of people transmitting to others next to them in some grid, and very simple assumptions about natural history of infection, how the infection spreads just locally to neighbors in the 8 directions. And you can get these really intriguing patterns once you start weaving in things like waning of immunity. Right. We'll have a whole module on ABM and GIS and the potential for building a GIS model if you'd like. Right. We've seen mobility here. You can have spatial location without mobility. You could have agents in space where their ability to cope with the situation is based on nearby resources to which they have access. But sometimes very commonly, actually, we pair an agent spatial location with movement, and that's what we've done in this model, right? In space, we've had them moving, and mobility induces very interesting patterns beyond just spatial embedding. It can speed up the sort of spread of things over the network, whether it's infection or disinformation or aspects of ideation or innovation or what have you. This from a model of chronic wasting disease from years back, but showing the pronounced patterns that could come through spatial emergence. We had this model built for many years as a system dynamics model. And that system dynamics model lent a great deal of insight about population dynamics. But it treated prion-based accumulation as sort of an aggregate over some area, the infectious agent at issue, the prions, misfolded proteins. So this is a chronic wasting disease. If I said Western, I meant chronic wasting disease. But it wasn't until this chronic wasting disease model came out and we could see the visual patterns of where the prions were being deposited that we realized the tremendous impact of heterogeneity, that certain prions were way disproportionately deposited at these kind of lacustrine boundaries, these boundaries with the water sources, where deer went frequently to take water and by extension, defecate and urinate in a way that could put out prions. I believe with urine as well, but certainly with defecation. And here, prions were concentrated along there, which is precisely a hotspot area for other deer coming and being there, grabbing grass or whatever, and using this area heavily, more so than the hinterland. And as a result, this concentration, this disproportionate heterogeneity, well, it has disproportionate effects on the spread. It matters that these are concentrated. And we didn't have that insight until we built, or these students built a spatially explicit model of chronic wasting disease. Okay, just one or two more things here. I kind of glossed over it, but ABMs are typically stochastic. If we look at the ABM, which is Cutter, on which we've focused much of our attention, the exact timing of recovery is stochastically determined. It's a stochastic process. It's drawn from a well-defined probability distribution. Same thing here, right, with this transmission event. There are exceptions like these timeouts, but even here, there's a flip of the coin for whether someone goes into the community on a given day or goes home directly. And indeed, an infection transmission, whether an infection is transmitted to whom it's sent or to whom it's sent depends on randomness and to random connected. So stochastics are not always, but very commonly at the heart of many agent-based models. And it's because, not surprising, we're depicting things, in large part, it's because we're depicting things at an individual level. And people's behavior is complex, and people's behavior is hard to predict. Fluke chances of who's in line in front of you at Tim Hortons or something, or for U.S. colleagues at Dunkin' Donuts, it's going to be chance. There's a lot of happenstance. During the pandemic, we saw that in spades at certain times. The chance event associated with the bond spiel that went bad, where groups of doctors got sick with COVID early on in the pandemic at this bond spiel and brought it back to their practices. Or the snowmobile rally that had an COVID-infected server serving food to people. These are, chance events, but they led to outbreaks in that case. And agent-based models seek to provide a lens to examine these phenomena and see their consequences in terms of variability and results. But to do that requires a certain degree of computational fortitude, because you have to run the model many times to get generalizable results, to make sure the results on a given run of a scenario are not merely flukes, that they are capturing patterns, regularities that are reliable. Requires you run model not just once, but a number of times. So you may have seen this, for these runs that we were doing, even for the baseline here, right? If anyone noticed, I think the first time we ran it, the peak was at 76%. Then it went to 77 the next time. Looks like this one may be at 81. That's chance. Now, I want to emphasize this point. This is actually a really important point. This is not just, it's all random. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just all stochastic and we can't say anything. No, that's absolutely not the case. There's regularities here. There are reliable features, but the features are not defined by the exact value to which this goes up, but often described more by this characteristic curve. And if you run it again and again, I think you've seen it a number of times now, but I'll do it once or twice more for good measure. You will see that basic pattern again and again and again. And my goodness, shape is the same. Structure determines behavior. Yes, there's variability around this basic thing. And we'll, in our bootcamp, we'll be exploring techniques that allow you to quantify just how variable this is, just how much this varies, and reason about the median and the standard deviation of it, or the empirical quantiles with it, etc. But we are here in the sphere where statistics is relevant because there's variability in results. So matters such as non-parametric statistics, because these are in general not normally distributed, etc., come to the fore. Kruskal-Wallis test, Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, Mann-Whitney one-way U-test or two-way U-test. If you're not testing if one thing is less than another, but possibly equal, possibly drawing from the same distribution. These it's not that we can't say anything, it's just variable. No, there's regularities, there's orderliness to this that come out of the structure of the model. There's variability around that. And to be rigorous about it, we want to run it typically a variety of times. And we call what's called running an ensemble, a whole collection here of different runs, realizations of a given scenario. And it's easy to think of this as like a shortcoming. Oh man, what a pain. But I turn it around. Often it's an asset. There are times where I've seen results from the world that challenge my hypothesis about what's going on in the world, certain statistics. And when I reproduce those statistics in the model, I find that they're highly variable given the stochastics of what's going on. And they often give the patterns seen in the world, which might otherwise mislead us. You might think that they run contrary to your hypothesis, but actually they're reproduced by the model using, with your hypothesis in place, you reproduce these patterns as well from the model. It's just a situation where the stochastics make it highly variable. And that has helped me assess the plausibility of my hypotheses as captured by the model. So stochastics here are an asset. They allow us to use a lens for things that can help us assess variability, help us assess, the chance that outbreaks will die out, before taking wing, before spreading really widely. And that can be important for interpreting data from the world. It can also be interpreting for reasons about the effects of our interventions. And again, not judging our intervention too negatively if the benefits seem to peter out, because in some cases it could be stochastics. So for a given run of the model, there might be a certain number of cumulative, in this case, low socioeconomic position cases, a certain number of high socioeconomic cases in those communities. For a given run, the cumulative number by the end might be some fixed number, would be in general. But if you run the model again and again and again and again, you'll find variability. You'll find, for example, that the low SES cases are variable, how many exactly you have. The high SES, the low ones are variable where they occur. Sometimes there even occur zero low SES because it dies out prematurely. The high SES are variable. Yeah. As a distribution, the highest, and by the way, I'm not showing here, but a large number of the high SES can also be zero. But in general, this is less than this by far cry. But they are zero heavy in this case. So here we can reason about the effects of our interventions or our findings, in this case, about equity issues, with regards to equity issues, in a way that is robust to stochastics, to the variability. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I will just say HMS models can have multiple scales. You can have mesoscales as well as high level as well as low level, and you can have multiple mesoscales. And if there's interest and will from the participants, we can build up models with mesoscales, like with homes, as well as people within those homes, as well as overall or neighborhoods, or cities, individual networks within cities, and then movement between cities induced by intercity mobility. Right. Yeah. We'll have a lecture on stylized models. Just be aware, not all models, per my earlier comments, are designed to be richly empirically grounded. A lot of models are designed to stimulate thinking, to get you to sharpen your thinking about how very simple processes can interact to yield complex behavior, and about how simple changes can induce marked changes in that behavior. Okay. Because we started talking earlier today about dynamic models in general, I'll just note some strengths befitting the focus of the boot camp, heavily on agent-based techniques and hybrids thereof. Some notable strengths of ABM. What are some areas of strengths? What are some areas where ABMs shine? Well, capturing continuous and discrete heterogeneity, targeting interventions according to heterogeneity by income, by location, by aspects of people's their history. So it turns out longitudinal information, we can capture how many times has a given person been infected before, how many times have they come in to the STI clinics, and we can target interventions on people who are frequent flyers or friendly faces, so I think they're more preferably known now. People who are there a lot, who have a history, we can keep that. That's quite hard to do in an aggregated way. Keeping track of history requires kind of clumping people in certain common stocks, and it gets really, really awkward if you have more than if you try to combine it with any type of intervention. And frankly, you're not capturing continuous heterogeneity in income or education level, if you consider that continuous, or aspects of someone's viral load level or what have you. You can represent network context as well as spatial context, and multi-level nesting. Very natural in these models to have like mesoscale, people in homes, in neighborhoods, in city, and you can capture effects at these different levels. You can capture situated decision-making, agents whose decision-making is different based on how many of their friends have caught COVID. So maybe that shapes whether they go for a vaccination. Or if any of their friends is expressing suspicion of wrongfully of the COVID vaccine, maybe they are affected. You can capture learning effects based on their past exposure, maybe involving trust or involving stigma, in kind of an unfortunate way. The experience of stigmatizing language may lead someone to stay away. I mentioned longitudinal information. In fact, we can gather it. It's very powerful. Targeting interventions, calibrating based on it, calibrating against data we have from the world based on people's history. Very natural, reasonably common need, very readily done with Asia-based models. We can characterize the dynamics of interventions often in ways that are fairly rich, and the details of how interventions take place in a way that reflects kind of implementation science type concerns. Visualization, per Sarah's comment earlier. Well, my comment in response to Sarah's, visualization can often aid communication here, and the fact that we can visualize little deer agents moving around for chronic wasting disease, or small individuals move from home to work or home to school to community. Sometimes those can help people understand what a model is really capturing. And that in a world where people hear mathematical model or mechanistic model and their eyes glaze over, that can actually be a real asset. Like having people say, oh, you have, little people moving around here and you're simulating who gets sick and who's not. Okay, that gives them something to hang on to that often is really valuable. I will say another key factor in my mind, and it's in the linkage of these methods with data science, big data, machine learning, statistics, is the capacity for agent-based models to serve as synthetic ground truth. And we have a case study that Wade McDonald here, our TA, will be presenting that shows how that can be done. But basically, you use an ABM to produce data similar to what you have from the world, and you can test machine learning models on it, or and you find blind spots, or find where they're strong, where they're weak, where they are reliable, and where they're not. You can also use it to test data collection methods and the adequacy of getting requisite sample size where power calculations are hard to do otherwise, etc. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That went on for a while, and I'd really like to be able to answer any questions from it, but also to be able to dive into building a model together. So any questions people would like to put forward about this material or anything else you've heard today?
There's one in the Q&A you could look at.
Great. For some reason, is it always necessary that some sort of relevant information parameter state in the model status quo from the beginning? If we want to know about outcomes under particular intervention, can you see 20% or 15% under diabetic medication? Well, so as I understand, it's a question about sort of someone's status in the model, maybe as their initial state, or the situation across the population, and is it necessary to sort of keep track of their characteristics, much as we kept track of variability in people's age, or variability in their homes, or the location of their homes, or what have you? Well, in general, heterogeneity can be quite important, and in a nonlinear model, heterogeneity can be disproportionately important, and important at certain times more so than others. So, in general, there are going to be certain types of information that you would like to keep track of, because they're going to govern a person's um, eligibility for or response to an intervention. Um, if a person in the population, for example, is not engaged in intravenous drug use, an intervention focused on needle exchange, or safe consumption sites are not going um, to have the level of effect on spread of Hep C or HIV/AIDS or what have you um, as it would otherwise. Um, if someone is in one of the alienated subpopulation who tries to minimize contact with the care system, etc., they might not be reached also by those interventions. And so often for an empirically grounded model, and this is an important proviso, you will want to take into account someone's kind of situation, as it were, in as much the features of it that are relevant for the delivery of the intervention or response to an intervention. You're going to be wanting to think like, what do I need to characterize to characterize their impact, like the impacts of an intervention on them, for example, or to capture dynamics over time in any sort of plausible way. Again, you do this in an incremental way, an iterative way. Often you won't represent all that possible information at once because you want to learn from doing. You want to learn as you add things. How does it affect the dynamics so that you have a better and better mental model? It's not about creating a crystal ball. It's about undertaking a learning opportunity. And so, generally you're going to want to start including some information about a person's eligibility or a person's aspects of their status that are relevant to their how they're affected by an intervention or what if scenarios. But I would emphasize that for like stylized models, you're trying to sharpen your understanding. It's like you're trying to sharpen your understanding of how this simple an assumption about this as a simple process. How would it affect dynamics? Schelling segregation model, which we'll be exploring together in the stylized modeling lecture, is a good example. This is not attempting to depict segregation in Watts or in Detroit or Dallas or what have you. It's in Birmingham. It's seeking instead to have a little simple model which will let us think through how, in isolation, if we have preferences by a given agent that depend on homophily, that depend on their similarity to others, that they would like to have a certain level of, to be comfortable, they have to have a certain number of people near them that look like them. How does that induce dynamics of behavior? And the fact is it induces profound dynamics and behavior. And that's, again, it's not about a particular context. It's not about, an empirically grounded model. It's a model for thinking. It's a model as thinking tool. It's a model to help us think more clearly through how might certain effects affect things in very 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 simple ways, and that often is useful. So I don't want to put all ABMs into the bucket, as important as that is to my lab and our work of empirically rich models. That happens to be an area where our lab has done a huge amount of work, but but it's by no means the only tradition, and you'll find wonderful models by the likes of, for example, Anadie Roux, or Rick Riolo and colleagues, Robert Axelrod, etc., that are very thoughtful, stylized models that teach core principles that give you ahas at a high level that are not contingent on context. They give you, real nuggets of insight about, okay, that's how those things interact. Even that is enough to explain certain phenomena we see in the world. And that helps you learn about the world. It helps you understand with respect to certain phenomenon. Oh, well, one simple explanation for that could be X that you wouldn't have expected otherwise. So I'll leave my comments there, I think. Thank you for the question. Any other questions from people? Yes, question.
I
Awesome.
could
Yes.
suggest one more question about when you're showing the states per infection. I see the parameter is 0 point on from infective to recovery phase. And then I was just thinking whether this rule applied for all of the infected people. It ignores age or ignores other biological endogenous heterogeneity of the individuals are not in that phase. Or if it ignores, then how we can include those age specific or gender specific recovery information, those kind of thing.
Yeah. The answer is very readily. As I sought to emphasize, the reason I use this model is because it is a stylized model. It is about as simple as you can get while still having some interesting dynamics and being some recognizable situation that has epidemiological relevance. I mean, if you want to do that, yes, I mean, it's very readily done. There's just no problem. But I mean, and what you'd learn over the course of the boot camp would provide ample opportunity to do that. It's straightforward and a routine thing within this sort of modeling. The the deeper question, though, is not whether there is differences of this sort in the world. It's, whether incorporating differences of the sort are sufficiently relevant for your context as to likely make a difference, and so that you would add them in the short term. And one has to be very cautious with these models and saying, well, we know there's heterogeneity in X in the world, therefore we'll put it into the model, because there's always going to be more detail. That'll be like saying, well, we know there's different lengths of grass on different people's lawns, here in the city, so we have to incorporate that in Google Maps to use it. No, there's going to be you want a parsimonious thing. You want to add it if you're convinced that it makes sense, and if now is the time to add it in terms of your learning. And that can require experimentation, require sensitivity analysis. It can also require, discussing of the opportunity cost. If you add this, what are you not adding? And models that tend to add too many things too liberally can easily bog down and easily yield almost no insight, because they don't get half the distance or a quarter of the distance you wanted them to. So things have opportunity costs. And when you're going to add things, you want to think, okay, is this the type of thing I need to add next? Adding it mechanically is often quite straightforward. Adding in the code to add it is not the problem. The problem is it the right thing to add now? Is this the right next thing to add? And and how can I learn from that? You have to be cautious, very cautious and parsimonious on what's our next step and how we can learn from it. In epidemiology, I carry an associate appointment in epidemiology, community health and epi, as some people will know here. And I think, it's a wonderful field and so on, but you have to understand the impulse to stratify in associational models. You have to resist that here, in agent-based models. Some of the biggest insights come from simple models, and you want to restrain yourself until you are confident that it makes sense to add this in and not add something else in. And you want to be quite critical about whether this is needed right now and whether this is the next thing to add. In epidemiology, there's just, I don't know how many times I've heard about it. Well, why don't you stratify it by this or that? And you can do that. You can capture that information in there. It's often not going to be on the critical path to your learning from a dynamic model. And often it complicates things in ways that impede certain types of insight if you do it too willingly. So you have to be very deliberate, very cautious, and very judicious about doing it and asking, what are we not going to do as a result? Because you can never do it all and it won't be helpful. Someone may say, well, if it doesn't have heterogeneity and income, how do I know if I trust it? So you trust your mental model more? How well is your mental model thinking about all these dynamics? Probably it's not nearly measuring up to what you can capture in your dynamic model, even without heterogeneity. You can think much more sharply, assisted by a simulation model. So there's agent-based modeling is so flexible. It's so flexible that it's a danger. Yes, you can add this in. Yes, you can add that in. You can add all sorts of things very readily mechanically. But if you do so, you're often putting barriers in your way towards learning, putting barriers towards added insight, putting barriers to really understanding, barriers to that foremost goal, which is learning and sharpening our mental model. So you want to be very cautious about this and very deliberative. So I'll leave it there. No. Great. Okay. Any other questions right now? Okay. So I think what we'll do is we'll break till past here. It's about 9 minutes, 8 minutes. And what I'd like to do then is to start building a little model, and we'll get it done by 4:30 our time. So in the next hour, and we'll leave it off there and resume when we're fresh and ready in the morning. So in other words, come back in 8 minutes and we'll do our first real model building. Thank you very much.